chaos reigns in the White House. It's been nearly 4 days since reports first surfaced that President Donald Trump's national security advisor, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, may have discussed easing U.S. sanctions against Russia when he spoke with the Russian ambassador to the U.S. before Trump was inaugurated. And we still don't have a clear picture of what Donald Trump thinks about these reports. But it's becoming clearer that officials around the president were indeed quite concerned about General Flynn. The Washington Post is reporting tonight that the former acting attorney general, Sally Yates, quote, informed the Trump White House late last month that she believed Michael Flynn had misled senior administration officials about the nature of his communications with the Russian ambassador to the United States, and warned that the national security advisor was potentially vulnerable to Russian blackmail, current and former U.S. officials said. The Post goes on to report that in the final days of the Obama administration, James Clapper, who was the director of national intelligence, and John Brennan, the CIA director at the time, shared Sally Yates's concerns about Flynn. And there's more. New reporting tonight from Politico that the Trump White House is reportedly searching for potential replacements for General Flynn. According to their reporting, Trump's advisor and son-in-law Jared Kushner is leading the search. The potential list of candidates includes names like retired General David Petraeus, who's scheduled to meet with the president this week. But Donald Trump's senior advisors are publicly sending mixed signals about the fate of the national security advisor. Late this afternoon, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer released this statement. Quote, the president is evaluating the situation. He's speaking to Vice President Pence relative to the conversation the vice president had with General Flynn, and also speaking to various other people about what he considers the single most important subject therein, our national security. So that sounds like the president has some doubts about his national security advisor. However, just an hour before that statement was released, White House counselor Kellyanne Conway told MSNBC that Trump has complete confidence in General Flynn.
General Flynn does enjoy the full confidence of the president.
By saying he enjoys the full confidence of the president, are you saying you're satisfied that he did not have those conversations, that he did not mislead the vice president?
No, those are two different questions. You asked me, and I'll repeat the answer, does he have the full confidence of the president? Yes, he does. Then you're asking me, what did he talk about with people when I wasn't on the phone? So the only way for me to answer that is to tell you what he has said, which is that he can't recall.
A senior administration official tells NBC News that General Flynn called Vice President Pence to apologize for misleading him about his communications with the Russian ambassador, even though Flynn's most recent statement on that matter was that he couldn't recall if sanctions were discussed. This afternoon, Donald Trump held a press conference after hosting Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau at the White House, where he, wait for it, wasn't asked about this issue. The president took questions from a conservative website, The Daily Caller, and a local outlet owned by a media group that White House advisor Jared Kushner reportedly negotiated with in an effort to secure better media coverage. That's according to a Politico report from back in December. A White House official tells NBC News several aides have been encouraging Trump to fire General Flynn, although multiple White House sources say a move is, quote, not imminent. An administration official told the Washington Post there's a broad consensus inside Trump's White House that Flynn lied to the White House about conversations he had with Russia. And developing tonight, Democrats on the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee have sent a letter to the committee's chairman, Republican Jason Chaffetz, requesting an investigation of Flynn in light of these new reports. And joining us now are Indira Lakshmanan, Washington columnist for the Boston Globe, John Schindler, national security columnist for the New York Observer. His new piece in the paper is called The Spy Revolt Against Trump Begins, and John Harwood, chief Washington correspondent for CNBC. And John, I'm going to start with you because it seems to me there are sort of different compartments of questions that need to be asked. I guess the most obvious one, and I'm going to throw it to you, is do we have any clarity as to whether Michael Flynn is on thin ice or has the confidence of the president? Because Kellyanne Conway is either misled, misinformed, or not being honest when she said that he does.
Well, I would say, Joy, he's clearly on thin ice. The question is that survivable? And I would say, based on what we saw today, that it might be survivable. When you look at the statements that were delivered back-to-back by Sean Spicer and Kellyanne Conway, remember, Kellyanne Conway is closer to the President of the United States than Sean Spicer is. Sean Spicer is closer to the Chief of Staff, Reince Priebus. But remember, in this White House, which is riven by factions, there's been speculation that Kellyanne Conway might succeed Reince Priebus as Chief of Staff. And so I would take her statement of full confidence of the president as meaning something. And I also think, finally, that when you look at the president and how he would think about firing General Flynn and how that would be giving in to critics, including critics in the media, I think his distaste for the media, distaste for giving critics what they want, probably exceeds his desire to try to make up with Mike Pence for whatever General Flynn told the vice president.
Yeah, and let's go to the other John Schindler on this, because I think the other sort of big question here, because everyone that's reporting on this story and discussing this story is presuming that Michael Flynn had conversations with the Russian ambassador, obviously that he didn't tell Mike Pence about, but the implication is that he also didn't tell necessarily the president about it. But what do we know about whether or not Donald Trump had foreknowledge of Michael Flynn having these kinds of conversations with the Russian ambassador? Can you imagine that Michael Flynn, who was destined to be in the administration, would have gone out on that kind of a limb with the ambassador without Donald Trump knowing he was going to do it?
No, I can't. And let me say up front that Donald Trump has taken a very casual attitude toward intelligence and security matters, blowing off top secret briefings, that sort of thing. But as you indicated, the notion that Mike Flynn was deputized on his own to say whatever he wanted, to cut whatever deal he wanted with the Russian ambassador in multiple conversations, which preceded even the election, is very, very hard to swallow, no matter how hands-off Trump may be about details, given the fact that the campaign was under scrutiny for months over its ties to Russia and what they really might be. It's difficult to imagine even a would-be administration as sort of oddly misorganized as this one not having some control over something as sensitive as talking to the Russian ambassador, which, by the way, Mike Flynn, a career intelligence officer, unless he's unimaginably stupid, had to be aware was going to be intercepted, and there'd be transcripts of it somewhere. So there's several layers of the onion that need to peel back here, none of which look very good for the White House right now.
Yeah, exactly, Inder. I mean, these are calls that are obviously monitored. He used to be the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, Michael Flynn. This isn't somebody who doesn't know that if you make a call to the Russian ambassador, it's going to be monitored. And so I wonder if we're not asking the most important question here. If there was a concern by Sally Yates, the former acting AG, that Michael Flynn was compromised by his various relationships with the Russians, shouldn't we also be asking whether he was having these conversations with the Russian ambassador, making assurances that he shouldn't have been making with the full knowledge of the president of the United States?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's completely inconceivable that any ambassador from Russia in the United States is not constantly being surveilled. Just as American ambassadors in Russia or in China or in any adversarial state assume that all of their conversations are being listened to, likewise here in Washington, similar ambassadors should always assume that their conversations are being tapped. And so for the former head of, defense intelligence to not know that, it stretches credulity. It doesn't make any sense that he wouldn't know he was being listened to. And what I thought was most interesting about that Washington Post story was that it wasn't just Sally Yates, who, of course, became famous to all of us who didn't know her before, or at least to members of the general public, because of being fired by Donald Trump over her refusal to enforce his migrant ban. But it was also, as you said, John Brennan, Obama's head of the CIA, and James Clapper, the DNI, who all wanted to go to someone in the White House, perhaps even Trump himself, to report this. And it wasn't just a violation of the Logan Act, which they realized maybe we can't prosecute him on that. These kinds of contacts with a foreign, agent during an election, but also just this very, very peculiar thing of undermining sanctions policy. I find it completely bizarre.
Yeah, and John Schindler, your piece is titled "The Spies Revolt Begins." You had Donald Trump really going after the intelligence community throughout the campaign and showing this incredible proclivity, this incredible affinity for Russia and for Vladimir Putin. He never criticizes Putin. He seems to be, sort of very positive toward everything that he does. And then you have Michael Flynn that's got this relationship going back to the time he was expelled from DIA. The New York Times has this report that the Army is investigating whether Michael Flynn took money from the Russian government in 2015. It says the Army is investigating whether Flynn received money from the Russian government during the trip he took to Moscow in 2015. According to defense officials, such a payment would violate the Emoluments Clause, which we've heard a lot about, which prohibits former military officers from receiving money. We know, it says the defense officials said there's no record of Mr. Flynn filing the required paperwork for the trip, and we know he was paid as a commentator for RT. Are we starting to see the intelligence services rebel against somebody that they fundamentally don't trust?
Yes, and they're sickened by this. And they understand that Mike Flynn used to be one of us. This was a career military intelligence officer, a Cold War veteran. This is not some guy off the street. He headed DIA. He knew exactly what he was doing when he took trips to Moscow, when he talked to Russian military intelligence, addressed them at their headquarters, when he sat famously at a table alongside Vladimir Putin for RT's 10th anniversary party, when he took money from RT, which he understood RT is the Kremlin. No matter what he says now, Michael Flynn is not dumb. He's a career intelligence guy. He knows exactly what he was doing. And this is just the tip of an iceberg. There are persistent reports that there were other payments, that other members of his family were receiving Russian payments. I have a feeling this is all going to start coming out soon, and it's not going to be pretty. And here's where Congress really needs to get involved, perhaps with a special prosecutor, because this is going to get very tricky very fast, politically speaking.
And very quickly, John Harwood, you have John Schindler reporting that you're starting to have sensitive information withheld from the White House because they don't necessarily trust Michael Flynn, et cetera. Could the White House possibly be trying to solve this problem by putting General Petraeus in instead? That's one of the reports that's floating around, when he has a conviction for passing classified data to his former girlfriend.
Well, look, I think David Petraeus would be a fine choice as National Security Advisor, notwithstanding that mistake that he made. He's got a lot of respect in the military community. I think the question is whether we get there and how quickly we get there. And the larger question that John's reporting raises is what sort of congressional inquiry are we going to have into not just Michael Flynn's ties with the Russians, but also the President of the United States ties? And what is the meaning of those? We don't know the answer. A lot of smoke, a lot of, we had the intelligence community report saying that they purposely intervened in the election to help the election of Donald Trump. Why did that happen? There are a lot of things that we don't know the answers to, and the biggest question is whether a Congress controlled by the president's party is going to oversee investigations that give us those answers.
Yeah, especially since, as you said, it has to go all the way to the President of the United States, because that is who hired and is sticking by so far Michael Flynn. John Schindler and John Harwood, thanks to both of you.